Blood dripped from Shane's split lip onto the pristine leather armrest of seat 1. Standing over him, panting like a rabid dog, Brock Holloway adjusted his expensive cuffs, thinking he had just taught a lesson to someone who didn't belong in first class. The cabin was deadly silent. Passengers held their breath. Brock smirked, expecting the flight attendants to drag the beaten man off the plane. He had no idea that the man he just assaulted wasn't just a passenger. He was Shane Mercer, the man who had signed the ownership papers for this entire airline exactly 45 minutes ago. And Brock's life was about to end. The rain battered against the reinforced glass of the departure lounge at O'Hare International Airport, creating a rhythmic, melancholy drumbeat that matched the mood of the tired travelers inside. It was a gray, miserable Tuesday in Chicago, the kind of day that made everyone just a little more irritable, a little more on edge. Shane Mercer sat in the corner of the exclusive Diamond Lounge, nursing a sparkling water with a twist of lime. At 42, Shane possessed a kind of stillness that often went unnoticed. He wasn't the tallest man in the room, nor the loudest. He wore a charcoal suit that was tailored to perfection, but lacked the flashy labels or ostentatious cufflinks that the other businessmen in the lounge seemed to favor. He had a closely trimmed beard and eyes that seemed to absorb everything while giving away nothing. On the small table in front of him rested a thick folder stamped with the logo of AeroVantage, a mid-sized airline that had been struggling with bankruptcy rumors for months to the world. AeroVantage was a sinking ship. To Shane, it was a challenge. He had spent the last 6 months in grueling negotiations, leveraging his private equity firm's assets to save the carrier. As of 8:00 a.m. that morning, the ink was dry. Shane Mercer was the majority shareholder and acting CEO of AeroVantage. Nobody knew yet, not the press, not the public, and certainly not the staff. He had booked a ticket on Flight for 92 to New York under his middle name, to see exactly what he had bought, to experience the service from the ground level before the announcement was made. He checked his watch. Boarding for first class was beginning. He gathered his things, moving with an easy, athletic grace as he approached the gate. He noticed a commotion near the counter. A man was berating the gate agent, his voice booming across the terminal. "I don't care about overhead bin space, sweetheart," the man sneered. He was tall, blonde, and built like a linebacker who had gone to seed. He wore a suit that probably cost more than the gate agent's car, and his face was flushed with a mixture of alcohol and entitlement. "I'm Brock Holloway. Do you know who my firm represents? I need priority boarding now, or I'm making a call that ends your cute little career." The gate agent, a young woman named Sarah, whose name tag looked crooked from stress, was trembling. "Sir, we are just waiting for the cleaning crew to finish. Everyone has to wait." "I don't wait," Brock snapped, slamming his boarding pass on the counter. Shane watched from a few feet away, his jaw tightening. He despised bullies. He stepped forward, his voice calm but projecting clearly. "She's doing her job. The plane isn't going anywhere without wings. Relax." Brock spun around, his eyes narrowing as he skinned Shane up and down. He took in Shane's dark skin, his quiet demeanor, and the lack of visible designer logos. A sneer curled his lip. "Excuse me, did the help just speak to me?" The air around them seemed to freeze. Several passengers gasped. Shane didn't blink. He didn't raise his voice. He simply held Brock's gaze. "I'm a passenger just like you, and I'd advise you to lower your voice." Brock laughed, a harsh, barking sound. "A passenger in first class, right? I'm sure you're upgrading with miles, pal. Stay out of adult conversations." Before Shane could respond, the intercom crackled. "Boarding for first class is now open." Brock shoved past Shane, his shoulder checking him hard, nearly knocking the folder from Shane's hand. "Out of the way," Brock muttered. Shane took a deep breath, centering himself. "Patience," he told himself. "Watch and learn." He followed Brock down the jet bridge, a bad feeling settling in his stomach. Upon entering the cabin, the difference in atmosphere was palpable. AeroVantage's first class was dated. The leather was cracked, the carpet worn. First thing to change, Shane noted mentally. He found his seat, 1A, a window seat with a good view of the tarmac. He stowed his briefcase and sat down. pulling out his tablet to review the flight manifest he had secretly acquired. He was just buckling his seatbelt when a shadow fell over him. It was Brock Holloway. "You're in my seat," Brock stated, his voice devoid of warmth. Shane looked up. He checked his ticket, then the small brass placard on the wall. "This is 1A. My ticket says 1A, and I always sit in 1A, Brock said, leaning down, invading Shane's personal space. The smell of expensive scotch and stale cigarettes was overpowering. The system must have screwed up. I'm a Platinum Legacy member. That means I get what I want. Move to 1B. Shane looked at seat 1B. It was the aisle seat right next to him. "It's the same seat configuration, sir. Just sit there." "I want the window," Brock hissed, "and I don't want to sit next to you." Shane's eyes hardened. "Is there a problem with me?" Brock leaned in closer, his voice dropping to a menacing whisper. "Yeah, I don't like the view. Now move your ass before I make you move." Shane unbuckled his seatbelt, but not to move. He stood up to face Brock, ready to de-escalate or defend, depending on where this went. "I suggest you sit in your assigned seat," 1B Shane said, his voice dropping an octave. "Becoming dangerous. I'm not moving." Brock's face turned a violent shade of red. He pressed the call button repeatedly, mashing it with his thumb. "Stewardess, stewardess, we have a stowaway situation here." Sarah, the same gate agent who had been harassed earlier, was now serving as the lead flight attendant. She hurried down the aisle, her face pale. She had hoped the flight would be smooth, but seeing Brock Holloway towering over the calm man in 1A made her heart sink. "Is there a problem, gentlemen?" Sarah asked, her voice wavering slightly. "Yes, there is." Brock spat, pointing a thick finger at Shane. "This man is in my seat. I want him moved to economy or off the plane. I don't care which." Sarah looked at Shane. "Sir, may I see your boarding pass?" Shane handed it to her gently. "Certainly." She scanned it. "Sir, this is 1A. It is his seat." She turned to Brock. "Mr. Holloway, your ticket is for 1B. It's right here." Brock snatched his ticket from his pocket, looked at it, and realized she was right. But for a man like Brock Holloway, being wrong was not an option. Being wrong was an insult. "I don't care what the computer says," Brock growled. "I booked 1A. Your incompetent airline switched it. I am not sitting in the aisle, and I am certainly not sitting next to him." He gestured vaguely at Shane, with a disgusted wave of his hand. "He probably doesn't even belong in this cabin. Check his ID. Check his bank account. I bet this ticket was stolen." "Sir, that is enough." Shane said, "You're making a scene." "I'm making a scene." Brock laughed incredulously. He turned to the other first-class passengers who were watching with wide eyes. "Can you believe this? I pay $3,000 for a ticket, and I have to deal with affirmative action seating." A few passengers gasped. An older gentleman in row 3, Henry, shook his head in disgust. "Sit down, son. You're embarrassing yourself," Henry called out. Brock spun around. "Shut up, old man." He turned back to Shane, his fists clenching at his sides. The veins in his neck were bulging. The alcohol in his system was stripping away his inhibitions, leaving only raw aggression. "Look," Brock said, stepping closer, his chest bumping Shane's. "I run a hedge fund that buys and sells companies like this for breakfast. I am important. You are nobody. Now, for the last time, get out of my seat." Shane didn't budge. He stood his ground like a statue. No, the refusal was the spark in the powder keg. Brock's hand shot out, shoving Shane backward. Shane stumbled, hitting the back of the seat, but caught his balance. "Sir, stop it," Sarah screamed, reaching for the inner phone to call the cockpit. "Don't you touch me," Shane warned, his voice low. He kept his hands open, palms showing. He knew the cameras were rolling. Every passenger with a smartphone was now recording. He needed to be unimpeachable. "That is assault. I'll show you assault," Brock roared. He wound up and threw a heavy, sloppy right hook. It wasn't a professional punch, but it had weight behind it. Shane saw it coming. He could have dodged. He could have countered. With the Krav Maga training he had practiced for years, he could have broken Brock's nose in a second. But Shane Mercer was a strategist. He knew that if he fought back, the narrative would be two men fight on plane. It would be mutual combat. He needed the world to see exactly who Brock Lesnar was. He needed the moral high ground to be absolute. So Shane took the hit. The fist connected with Shane's jaw with a sickening crunch. The force threw him back into the seat. He tasted copper instantly. His lips split open. "Oh my God," a woman in to be screamed. Shane slumped into the seat, dazed. He raised a hand to his mouth and pulled it away. It was covered in bright red blood. He looked up at Brock. He didn't look afraid. He looked disappointed. "Is that it?" Shane whispered. Brock, fueled by the adrenaline of violence, didn't stop. "Stay down." He lunged forward, grabbing Shane by the lapels of his suit. He dragged him partially out of the seat and slammed him against the cabin wall. Brock's knee came up, driving into Shane's ribs. "Stop him. Someone help." Sarah was crying now, pulling at Brock's jacket. But he swatted her away like a fly. She crashed into the galley cart, sending sodas and ice flying everywhere. Captain Anderson burst out of the cockpit door, having heard of the commotion. "Back off now." But Brock was in a frenzy. He landed another punch to Shane's eye, then another to his ribs. Shane curled up, protecting his head, enduring the beating. He felt a rib crack. The pain was sharp and blinding, but his mind remained crystal clear. Let him finish, Shane thought. Let everyone see. Finally, two other male passengers, a young Marine and a large man in a hoodie, rushed forward. They tackled Brock, dragging him off Shane. Brock thrashed and cursed, spitting blood and saliva. "Get off me! Do you know who I am?" Brock screamed, as they pinned him to the floor of the aisle. Shane slowly pulled himself up. He used the armrest for support. His left eye was already swelling shut. Blood ran down his chin, staining his white dress shirt and the expensive charcoal suit. He looked like a wreck, but when he stood tall. He wiped his mouth with the back of his hand, looking at the blood. Then he looked at Sarah, who was sobbing on the floor. He looked at the passengers, terrified and shocked. And finally, he looked down at Brock Holloway, who was still screaming obscenities while pinned to the carpet. Shane reached into his inner jacket pocket. The movement made everyone flinch, thinking he was reaching for a weapon. Instead, he pulled out a phone. He didn't call the police, not yet. He dialed a number on speed dial. The room was silent enough that everyone could hear the ringtone. "Hello, Mr. Mercer." A voice answered on speaker. It was the chief of operations for the airport. "This is Shane," his voice thick due to the swelling lip. He said, "Initiate Protocol 0 immediately." "Protocol 0, sir. That shuts down the entire terminal. That grounds every AeroVantage bird in the sky. Are you sure?" Shane looked directly at Brock, whose eyes had suddenly gone wide. "I said, shut it down." Shane said, his voice cold as ice, "Ground the fleet. Cancel this flight and get airport security and the FBI to Gate 42. I have a passenger who just assaulted the owner of the airline." He hung up the phone and looked down at Brock. "You wanted to know who I am," Shane whispered, leaning in so only Brock could hear. "I'm the man who's about to ruin you." The silence that followed Shane's phone call was heavier than the storm raging outside. For 3 agonizing seconds, nothing happened. Brock Holloway, still pinned to the carpet by the Marine and the man in the hoodie, let out a wet, scoffing laugh. "Protocol 0? Brock wheezed, blood bubbling on his lips. "You watch too many movies, boy." Nothing was going to happen. He was cut off by the sudden, jarring sound of the aircraft's engines powering down. The low hum that usually vibrated through the floorboards vanished, replaced by the stark hiss of the air conditioning vents. Then the cabin lights flickered and surged to full brightness, bathing the scene in an unforgiving, sterile white glow. Outside the window, the tarmac exploded with activity. Red and blue lights reflected off the wet pavement, bouncing against the fuselage. It wasn't just one police cruiser. It was an armada, airport authority police, Customs and Border Protection, and two black SUVs that looked ominously like federal vehicles. They screeched to a halt around the nose of the plane. "Ladies and gentlemen," Captain Anderson's voice came over the intercom, sounding shaken but professional. "Please remain seated with your seatbelts fastened. We have been ordered by the tower to cut engines and hold position. Security personnel are boarding the aircraft immediately." Brock's struggle renewed, panic finally piercing his alcohol-fueled haze. "Get off me." "This is a mistake. You're hurting my shoulder." The cabin door, which had been closed for departure, was thumped from the outside. Sarah, wiping tears from her face, disarmed the slide and cracked the lever. The door swung open, and the cold Chicago air rushed in, smelling of jet fuel and rain. Four officers in tactical gear stormed the cabin. "Police, nobody move," the lead officer shouted, his hand resting on his holster. "He's down here." The Marine shouted, keeping his knee firmly on Brock's back, "We have the assailant secured." The officers swarmed the aisle, and they hauled Brock to his feet. He looked wild-eyed, his suit jacket torn, his hair a disheveled mess. As they slapped the handcuffs on him tight, he spotted the lead officer. "Officer, thank God," Brock stammered, switching tactics to the victim card. "These men attacked me. That man there," he nodded his chin toward Shane. "He provoked me. He assaulted me first. I want to press charges." The lead officer didn't even look at Brock. He looked past him, scanning the cabin, until his eyes landed on Shane Mercer. Shane was sitting on the edge of the armrest of seat 1B, holding a cocktail napkin to his bleeding lip. His left eye was now a swollen purple slit. He looked battered, but his posture was regal. The officer stiffened and walked straight past Brock, ignoring his shouting. He stopped in front of Shane. "Mr. Mercer," the officer asked, his tone respectful, almost fearful. "I'm Sergeant Miller. The chief sent us. Do you require a stretcher?" "I can walk," Shane said, his voice raspy. He winced as he stood up, clutching his side where the rib was cracked. "But I want this man," read his rights loudly, "so everyone can hear." "You know this guy," Brock screamed, as the other officers dragged him toward the door. "This is corruption. I'll sue the department. I'll sue the airline. Do you know who my father is? Do you know who I am?" Shane limped into the aisle, blocking Brock's path to the exit. The officers paused, allowing the confrontation. Shane looked Brock dead in the eye. "With his one good eye, you keep asking that question. Brock, do you know who I am?" Shane reached into his jacket pocket again. The officers didn't flinch this time. He pulled out a blood-smeared ID badge. It wasn't a standard airline badge. It was a black card with a gold chip and the words AeroVantage Holdings, Chairman and CEO, embossed in silver. He held it up to Brock's face. "I'm your landlord," Shane whispered. "I'm your pilot. I'm the guy who owns the seat you're sitting in, the fuel in the wings, and the lawyer you're about to call. You assaulted the chairman of the board on his first day of work." Brock's face went slack. The color drained out of him so fast he looked like a ghost. He stared at the badge, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. That's not possible," Brock whispered. The deal hasn't closed yet. It was supposed to be finalized at noon in New York. I closed it early," Shane said coldly. "Get him off my plane." As they dragged Brock out, kicking and screaming obscenities again, Shane turned to the rest of the cabin. The passengers were silent, phones raised, capturing every second. Shane looked at Sarah, the flight attendant. She was shaking. "What is your name?" Shane asked gently. "Sarah, sir." "Sarah Jenkins." "Sarah," Shane said, loud enough for the cabin to hear. "You handled yourself with incredible poise. You are promoted to head of in-flight services, effective immediately. And everyone on this flight, you're all getting a full refund and a 50,000-mile voucher for the trauma." Cheers erupted from the economy cabin behind them, but Shane didn't smile. He slumped back against the bulkhead, the adrenaline finally wearing off, replaced by a wave of agonizing pain. "Sir," Sergeant Miller said, grabbing Shane's elbow to support him. "The paramedics are at the gate. We need to get you checked out." "Fine," Shane grunted, "but don't take me to the hospital yet. Take me to the airport police station. I have a meeting with Mr. Holloway." The holding cell at O'Hare's internal police precinct was a stark cinder block room that smelled of industrial cleaner and stale coffee. It was a far cry from the first-class lounge Brock Holloway was used to. Brock sat on a metal bench, his hands cuffed to the table in front of him. He had been stripped of his belt, his shoelaces, and his dignity, but the arrogance that was harder to remove. He was currently screaming at a young officer named Reynolds. "I demand my phone call. I am calling my partners at Goldman Sachs. I am calling the governor. You can't hold me here." This is a civil dispute. It's aggravated battery and endangering the safety of a flight crew. Federal charges. Officer Reynolds said calmly, not looking up from his paperwork. Sit down, Mr. Holloway. You're making a mistake, Brock spat. That guy isn't the owner. He's a con artist. He had a fake badge. AeroVantage is owned by a private equity group called Aurora Capital. I know because I'm flying to New York to strip their assets. I'm the managing director of Holloway and Associates. We are the liquidators. The door to the interrogation room buzzed and clicked open. Brock straightened up, expecting his high-priced lawyer. Instead, Shane Mercer walked in. Shane had been cleaned up by the EMTs. He had a butterfly bandage over his split eyebrow and a brace wrapped around his torso. Beneath a fresh white shirt that someone had brought him, he moved stiffly, carrying a heavy file box. He was followed not by a lawyer, but by a gray-haired man in a suit, Thomas O'Malley, the longtime general counsel for AirAdvantage. Shane set the box on the table and sat opposite Brock. He didn't speak. He just stared. You, Brock sneered, though his voice wavered. You kept up the charade long enough to get into the station. That's impressive. How much did you pay these cops? Shane opened the file box. He pulled out a single thick document bound in blue leather. Do you recognize this, Brock? Shane asked. Brock squinted. It looks like a merger agreement. It is. Shane said, specifically, it's the acquisition agreement for AirAdvantage. You mentioned Aurora Capital. You were right. Aurora owned the airline until 8 a.m. this morning. Shane slid the document across the metal table, turned to page 42. Look at the signature of the acquiring partner. Brock hesitated, his hands shaking in the cuffs. He awkwardly flipped the pages with his fingers until he reached the signature page, signed, Shane J. Mercer, CEO, Mercer Global Holdings. Brock froze. He looked up at Shane, then back at the paper. Mercer Global, no, that's a tech fund. You guys don't buy airlines. We do when we want to diversify, Shane said smoothly, but here is the twist. Brock, the part you didn't know because you were too busy shouting at gate agents to read the industry. Memos. Shane pulled a second document from the box. This one had the logo of Holloway and Associates, Brock's own firm. This, Shane said, tapping the paper, is the loan agreement your firm has with Citibank to leverage the buyout of AeroVantage's debt. You are coming to New York to pitch yourself as the liquidator. You were going to convince the new owners, me, that the airline was worth more dead than alive. You were going to suggest selling off the planes, firing the staff, and gutting the pension fund. That was your big play, wasn't it? Brock swallowed hard. That was exactly his play. It was a scheme that would have netted him a $10 million commission. So what Brock tried to regain his footing, it's a solid business strategy. You need me. I know where the bodies are buried. You can't run an airline, you're a suit. I can help you liquidate this junk heap and double your investment. Shane laughed a dry, humorless sound. He leaned forward, ignoring the pain in his ribs. You still don't get it. I didn't buy this airline to liquidate it, Brock. My mother was a stewardess for this airline in the 80s. My father was a mechanic in the hangar. I grew up eating peanuts from the galley carts. I bought this airline to save it. Shane's eyes bore into Brock's soul, and to save it, I need to clear out the rot. And you, Brock, you are the rot. Shane motioned to Thomas the lawyer. Thomas stepped forward and placed a tablet on the table, playing a video. It was footage from the gate area, taken 30 minutes before the flight. We pulled the security tapes, Thomas said. But we also pulled your firm's communication logs. See? Mercer Global Holdings also owns a significant stake in the data servers your firm uses. Shane cut in. I know about the bribes, Brock. I know about the kickbacks you took from the catering vendors to serve substandard food. I know you've been shorting AeroVantage stock through a shell company in the Cayman Islands, driving the price down so you could buy it cheaper. Brock's face turned ashen. That's privileged information. You can't use that. I can when I hand it to the SEC, Shane said, which I did 5 minutes ago. Shane stood up, wincing but satisfied. You beat me bloody today, Brock. You broke my rib. You humiliated me. But in doing so, you gave me the perfect reason to audit every single inch of your life. I didn't just shut down the airline for safety. I shut it down to freeze the assets involved in the transfer. Your assets. Shane leaned down one last time. You're not going to New York. You're going to federal prison for assault, insider trading, and corporate espionage. And the best part, Shane pointed to the camera in the corner of the interrogation room. The video of you beating a nobody in seat 1A is already trending on Twitter. It has 4 million views. CNN is setting up in the lobby right now. You're not just broke, Brock. You're the most hated man in America. Brock Holloway, the man who thought the world was his to take, slumped forward, putting his head on the cold metal table and began to weep. Shane buttoned his jacket. Let's go, Thomas. We have an airline to run. The fallout was not a ripple. It was a tsunami. By the time Shane Mercer was being wheeled into a private room at Resurrection Medical Center near O'Hare, the video of his beating had been viewed 12 million times. The hashtag #FirstClassPlea was trending #1 globally on formerly Twitter, beating out the Super Bowl halftime show announcements. Shane lay in the hospital bed, the sterile smell of antiseptic filling his nose. His ribs were tightly bound. An Enfer drip of saline and anti-inflammatories was taped to his hand. He felt like he had been run over by a truck, but his mind was racing at 100 miles an hour. Thomas O'Malley sat in the uncomfortable vinyl chair next to the bed, a laptop balanced on his knees. The gray-haired lawyer looked more energized than he had in years. The district attorney for Cook County just called, Thomas said, typing furiously. She wants to make an example of Holloway. They're upgrading the charges, aggravated battery in a public place, interfering with a flight crew, and this is the kicker, a hate crime enhancement. Shane stared at the ceiling tiles, counting the little dots. Did they deny bail for now? Thomas nodded. He's spending the night at Cook County Jail. Division 11, it's not exactly the Ritz. His lawyer, some high-priced shark named Arthur Sterling, is screaming bloody murder about due process. But no judge wants to touch this with a 10-foot pole, not with the video out there. Shane reached for the remote and clicked on the television mounted on the wall. He tuned it to CNBC. The headline on the bottom ticker read, Aerovantage CEO hospitalized after assault. Holloway and Associates stock plummets 40%. On the screen, Jim Cramer was shouting, waving his arms maniacally, sell, sell, sell. Brock Holloway is radioactive. If you have money in Holloway and Associates, get it out now. This isn't just a PR crisis. This is a leadership vacuum. You cannot have a managing director who beats up Fortune 500 CEOs in an airplane aisle. Shane turned off the TV. The physical pain in his jaw was throbbing, a dull heavy ache that made talking difficult. But he had to speak. Thomas, get me the PR team on conference call and get me the file on the board of directors. Shane, you need to rest. The doctor said you have a mild concussion. I'll rest when the cancer is cut out, Shane murmured, sitting up and wincing. Brock was just the fist, the brain that directed him. The people who enabled him to short the stock and gut the company. They're still sitting in my boardroom. I need to fire them before the market opens tomorrow. Meanwhile, 3,000 miles away in New York, the offices of Holloway and Associates were in chaos. It was 4 p.m., usually a time when the trading floor was winding down. But today it was a scene of panic. Phones were ringing off the hooks. Major investors, pension funds, university endowments, sovereign wealth funds were pulling their capital. Brock's executive assistant, a sharp woman named Jessica, who had endured his verbal abuse for 5 years, watched the news on her monitor. She saw the video of Brock spitting on the man she now knew was Shane Mercer. She saw the hatred in Brock's eyes. She looked at her phone. A text message from her husband read, "Did you see it? Quit now." Jessica stood up. She walked into Brock's massive corner office, which overlooked the Hudson River. She picked up a stack of files Brock had told her to shred if anyone ever came looking. They were the shadow ledgers, the records of the illegal kickbacks and the shell companies in the Caymans. She didn't shred them. She walked out of the office, past the panic-stricken junior analysts, and took the elevator down to the lobby. She walked straight to the Federal Bureau of Investigation field office on Broadway. Back in Chicago, the reality of karma was hitting Brock Holloway with the force of a freight train. He was processed like any other criminal. His bespoke Italian suit was stripped off and bagged, replaced by a stiff, orange jumpsuit that smelled of mildew. He was fingerprinted, his mug shot taken. The flash of the camera blinded him, a harsh reminder of his new reality. When he was led to a holding cell, he expected isolation. He expected special treatment. Instead, he was shoved into a general holding pen with 20 other men. As the heavy steel door slammed shut, the noise of the jail washed over him, shouting, banging, the smell of unwashed bodies and despair. Brock backed into a corner, trying to make himself small. A large man sitting on a bench looked up. He recognized Brock, not from the business pages, but from the TV in the booking area. "Hey," the man said, pointing a scarred finger, "you're the guy from the plane. The one who hit the brother in the suit." The cell went quiet. All eyes turned to Brock. It was a misunderstanding." Brock stammered, his voice cracking. "I have a lawyer. I'm getting out in an hour." "You hit a man who wasn't fighting back," another inmate said, standing up. "That ain't a misunderstanding. That's a bitch move." Brock Holloway, the master of the universe, the man who moved millions with a phone call, curled into a ball in the corner of a dirty concrete cell, realizing that his money held no currency in here. 36 hours later, Thursday morning, Shane Mercer walked into the headquarters of AeroVantage in Dallas, Texas. He had checked himself out of the hospital against medical advice. His left arm was in a sling, his eye was a vivid tapestry of black and yellow bruising, and he walked with a slight limp, favoring his cracked ribs. But he was wearing a fresh suit, navy blue this time, sharp and intimidating. The lobby of the headquarters fell silent as he entered. Employees stopped in their tracks. Receptionists stopped typing. They had all seen the video. They saw the man who had taken a beating to protect their airline. As he walked to the elevator banks, a mechanic in grease-stained coveralls stepped forward. He was a big guy holding a wrench. Security started to move, but Shane held up a hand. The mechanic looked at Shane, then nodded. "Mr. Mercer, welcome aboard." "Thank you," Shane said, his voice raspy. "Good to be here." He took the executive elevator to the 40th floor. The boardroom was where the emergency board meeting had been called for. It was 8:59 a.m. Shane pushed open the double mahogany doors. 12 men and women sat around the long oval table. These were the directors of AirAdvantage. They were the ones who had watched the airline fail for years while collecting fat checks. They were the ones who had been planning to sell the company to Brock Holloway's liquidation firm. They looked up as Shane entered. The tension in the room sucked the air out of the space. Shane didn't sit. He stood at the head of the table, placing his good hand on the polished wood. Thomas O'Malley stood behind him, looking like the Grim Reaper with a briefcase. "Good morning," Shane said. "I apologize for my appearance. I ran into some turbulence." No one laughed. "Let's cut to the chase," Shane continued, his gaze sweeping over them. "I have reviewed the minutes of the last 12 board meetings, the voting records, and the private emails provided to me by a whistleblower at Holloway and Associates." He threw a stack of papers onto the table. They slid across the surface, stopping in front of a man named Richard Sterling, Brock's cousin and the chairman of the compensation committee. "Richard," Shane said softly, "you voted to cut the pilot pension fund last month, citing budget constraints. Yet 3 days later, you approved a consulting fee of $2 million to a firm called Blue Sky Strategy." Richard tugged at his collar. "That was standard advisory work." "Shane, you don't understand the complexities. Blue Sky Strategy is registered to your wife's maiden name, and the IP address for their invoices traces back to your vacation home in Aspen." The room gasped. "That is embezzlement and fraud." He turned to the woman on his left, a socialite named Beatrice, who had inherited her seat. "Beatrice, you sold 50,000 shares of stock 2 hours before the bankruptcy rumors leaked last month." Inside of trading, he went around the table one by one. He had the receipts, he had the logs, he had the proof that this board had been feasting on the carcass of the airline, while the employees suffered. "You have two choices," Shane said, his voice hard as iron. "Option A, you remain on this board. I will hand this entire file to the DOJ and the SEC. You will be arrested, you will be indicted, and you will spend your retirement in federal prison. He paused, letting the silence stretch. Option B, you resign immediately, effective now. You waive your severance packages. You pay back the consulting fees, and you walk out of this building and never come back. Richard Sterling stood up, his face red. You can't do this. We are the board. We can fire you. Actually, Thomas O'Malley piped up from the back, according to the acquisition. Bylaws triggered yesterday when Mr. Mercer executed the buyout. He holds 51% of the voting shares. He is the board. Shane looked at Richard. Tick-tock, Richard. The FBI is in the lobby. I told them to give me 10 minutes. You have 5 left. Richard looked at the door, then at Shane. He saw the bruising on Shane's face, the absolute lack of fear. He realized that a man who would let himself be beaten bloody to prove a point was not a man to be bluffed. Richard reached into his briefcase, pulled out a pen, and scribbled his resignation on a notepad. He threw it on the table and stormed out. One by one the dominoes fell. Beatrice resigned. The others followed within 6 minutes. The boardroom was empty save for Shane, Thomas, and one director, a woman named Catherine. She had been the only dissenter in the previous votes, trying to save the company. Shane looked at Catherine. She was a former pilot, tough and smart. Catherine, Shane said, you stayed, and I'm not afraid of a fight. Shane smiled, the first genuine smile in days. Good. Because I'm appointing you Chief Operating Officer. We have a lot of work to do. What's the first order of business? Catherine asked, standing up. Shane walked to the window, looking out over the Dallas skyline. He could see planes taking off in the distance, silver birds climbing into the sky. Shane said the first order of business is to apologize to the staff and to the passengers. We need to earn their trust back. He turned back to her. Schedule a town hall meeting in the main hangar. Invite everyone, baggage handlers, pilots, gate agents, janitors, and get a camera crew. I want the world to see the new Aero Vantage. Brock, Catherine asked. What about him? Shane touched the bandage on his eye. Brock is the past. Shane said, he's about to find out that in the real world, you can't buy your way out of gravity. What goes up must come down. The following Monday, the main maintenance hangar at Dallas-Fort Worth International Airport was transformed. Usually a cathedral of grease, hydraulic fluid, and the sharp tang of jet fuel, it was now filled with over 4,000 people. They stood on the concrete floor, sat on tool chests, and perched on the scaffolding surrounding a massive Boeing 707 that was undergoing a C-check. These were the people of Aero Vantage, the baggage handlers with back braces, the gate agents with tired feet, the mechanics with stained fingernails, and the pilots in their crisp uniforms. They were the heartbeat of the airline, and for years they had been treated like liabilities on a balance sheet. A temporary stage had been erected under the nose of the massive jet. There were no teleprompters, no flashy graphics, just a single microphone stand when Shane Mercer walked onto the stage. The hush that fell over the hangar was absolute. He was still healing. The bruising on his face had faded to a sickly yellow-green, and his arm remained in a sling. But he walked without the limp. He didn't wear a suit jacket today. He wore a simple white dress shirt with the sleeves rolled up, revealing the butterfly bandage on his forearm where the IV had been. He tapped the microphone. The sound echoed through the vast steel cavern. I'm not going to give you a corporate speech. Shane began, his voice clear and steady. I'm not going to talk about synergy or EBITDA or Q3 projections. He looked out at the sea of faces. Last week, I took a flight. I sat in seat 1A, and I got the hell beaten out of me. A ripple of nervous laughter moved through the crowd, but the punches didn't hurt as much as what Mr. Holloway said before he threw them. He called the people who work for this airline the help. He treated the crew like furniture. He acted as if the only thing that mattered was the price of his ticket and the title on his business card. Shane stepped out from behind the podium, grabbing the mic stand and walking to the edge of the stage. For too long, this company has been run by men like Brock Holloway. Men who think that leadership is about being served rather than serving. Men who think that cutting your pension is smart business so they can buy a third vacation home. He pointed to a group of ramp agents in neon vests near the front. I bought this airline for one reason: to prove them wrong, to prove that an airline isn't the planes. It's not the logo, it's you. It's the mechanic who stays an hour late to double-check a hydraulic line because he knows a family is flying on that plane in the morning. It's the gate agent who smiles at a stressed mother and helps her fold a stroller. It's the pilot who navigates a storm to get everyone home safely. Shane signaled to Catherine, the new crew, who was standing in the wings. She walked out holding a large placard. Effective immediately, Shane announced, his voice rising. We are implementing the Employee Ownership Initiative. I am transferring 40% of the company's voting stock into a trust owned exclusively by the employees of AirAdvantage. The silence held for a heartbeat, as if the crowd couldn't process the words. Then it broke. A roar erupted in the hangar. It started as a cheer, then became a chant. People were hugging. Some were crying. It wasn't just about money. It was about dignity. They weren't just employees anymore. They were partners. Shane raised his hand to quiet them. We have a long road ahead. He said seriously. We have to fix the planes. We have to improve the food. We have to earn back the public's trust. But we will do it together. And if anyone ever treats you with disrespect again, whether it's a passenger or a manager, you tell them to call me. He smiled a genuine, warm expression that reached his eyes. Now get back to work. We have planes to fly. While AirAdvantage was rising from the ashes, Brock Holloway was descending into his own personal hell. The trial of United States versus Brock Holloway did not take place in a quiet back room. It was the media circus of the decade. The video of the assault had become a symbol of corporate arrogance, and every prosecutor in the country wanted a piece of him. Brock's lawyer, Arthur Sterling, tried every trick in the book. He tried to argue temporary insanity caused by a mix of prescription medication and alcohol. He tried to get the venue changed, arguing Brock couldn't get a fair trial in Chicago. He even tried to suppress the video evidence, claiming it violated Brock's privacy. Judge Anthony V. Moretti, a no-nonsense federal judge with 30 years on the bench, denied every single motion. Privacy, Judge Moretti asked over the rim of his glasses during a pretrial hearing. Mitch Holloway, you assaulted a man in a metal tube at 30,000 feet in front of 200 witnesses. You surrendered your privacy the moment you threw the first punch. But the real blow didn't come from the judge. It came from the witness stand. On the third day of the trial, the prosecution called their star witness. The courtroom doors opened, and Jessica Brock's former executive assistant walked in. She didn't look at Brock. She looked straight at the jury. She testified for hours, detailing the insider trading and explaining the shadow ledgers. She walked the jury through the emails where Brock explicitly discussed sabotaging AirAdvantage to lower the stock price. She laid bare the soul of a man who would burn down a company just to sell the scrap metal. Brock sat at the defense table, his face a mask of horror. He realized then that he hadn't just lost a fight on a plane. He had lost his life. The people he had stepped on to get to the top were now the ones kicking him into the grave. The jury deliberated for less than 2 hours. The verdict was unanimous on all counts: aggravated assault, interfering with a flight crew, securities fraud, wire fraud, conspiracy. At the sentencing hearing, Brock was given a chance to speak. He stood up, wearing an orange jumpsuit, his blonde hair now grown out and greasy, his face gaunt. He opened his mouth to offer an apology, to beg for leniency, but he looked at the gallery. In the front row sat Shane Mercer. Shane wasn't smiling. He wasn't gloating. He was just watching with that same terrifying calmness he had shown on the plane. Brock choked on his words and sat back down in silence. Brock Holloway, Judge Moretti boomed, his voice filling the courtroom. You represent the worst of us. You used your power not to build, but to destroy. You treated your fellow man with contempt. Today, the system you thought you were above is bringing you back down to earth. The gavel banged. I sentence you to 25 years in federal prison, to be served at FC Iotisville. You are also ordered to pay restitution of $50 million to the shareholders of AirAdvantage. Marshals, take him away. As Brock was handcuffed and led out of the courtroom, the flashing cameras caught one last image of him. He wasn't looking at the press. He was looking back at Shane Mercer. And for the first time in his life, Brock Holloway looked small. 1 year later, The flight from London to New York was smooth. The cabin of the new Era Vantage 787 Dreamliner was quiet, bathed in soft blue LED lighting. In seat 1A, a young businessman was tapping furiously on his laptop. He was stressed, rude, and snapping his fingers at the flight attendant. "I asked for sparkling water 10 minutes ago," the young man snapped. The flight attendant, a woman named Sarah wearing the new, elegant Aero Vantage uniform with the golden wings pin, smiled patiently. "I'll get that for you right away," before the young man could snap again. A hand reached across the aisle from seat 1B. It was a gentle but firm hand. "Relax," the passenger in 1B said. The young man looked over. He saw a man with a neatly trimmed beard reading a book. He looked familiar, though the young man couldn't place him. "She's doing her job," Shane Mercer said quietly. "And this is a good airline. We treat people with respect here." The young man looked at Shane's eyes that had seen the worst of people and chosen to be the best. He felt a chill go down his spine. He didn't know why, but he felt that arguing with this man would be the biggest mistake of his life. "Sorry," the young man muttered, shrinking back into his seat. "I'm just stressed." Shane smiled and went back to his book. "We all are," Shane said. "Just remember to be kind. You never know who you're sitting next to." Outside the window, the sun was rising over the clouds, painting the sky in brilliant hues of gold and violet. The plane soared onward, steady and strong, carried by the wings of a company that had found its soul. This story reminds us that true power isn't about the volume of your voice or the cost of your suit. It's about character, humility, and how you treat those who can do nothing for you. Brock Holloway learned the hard way that when you climb to the top by stepping on others, the fall is a lot longer and hits a lot harder. Shane Mercer showed us that leadership is about protection, patience, and justice. In a world full of Brocks, be a Shane, stand your ground, protect the vulnerable, and lead with integrity. If you enjoyed this story of instant karma and justice, please smash that like button. It really helps the channel grow. Don't forget to share this video with someone who needs to see a bully get what they deserve. And subscribe with notifications on, so you never miss a new story. Comment below, what would you have done if you were in seat 1B? I read every comment. Thanks for watching and see you in the next video.